And then I'm going to record, ping, nice. We're going to look today, this afternoon, for the next hour and a bit at the Renaissance itself. And our primary focus is going to be looking at the art, looking at the key Renaissance artists and how they changed the way in which art is really done. And that is symbolic or it's emblematic of the way in which really Europe is going to evolve as we work our way through the course. So you take the old way of doing something that had been done for a long period of time, and then we look at how it is adapted and evolved. So I'm going to click on present now, present the entire screen. Oh, wait, before I do that, I'm going to change cameras. We're going to go to the big camera at the front, integrated camera, USB camera. There we go. Going to the front. There it is. So I'm going to present this to you, and then I'll end up just at the bottom of your screen. Actually, maybe I'll just stay here on this camera for now. Yeah, I'll stay here. I'm just going to stay off on the side of your screen, which is fine. So as we work our way through this, again, you don't need to necessarily write down notes. You don't need to jot down things. But keep in mind, in the back of your mind, what I want you to be thinking about is how does the Renaissance really change the way in which we view the world, we understand the world, we interact with one another, and so on, because that's going to tie us into our I don't want captions on. That's going to tie us into our response question, which I'm going to give you at the end of the day. All right. So here we go, presenting to everyone. There we are. All right. Hide. Okay. So that's working perfect. So when we look at Europe in 1519, it's important to understand that not a single country in Europe today is the same country as it was in 1519. And what I mean by that is the geography has all changed, so the borders are all different, the style of government is all different. There are countries that didn't exist in 1519 that exist today. There are countries that existed in 1519 that don't exist today, and so on. So when you look at that, there's no, in the central part of Europe here, there's no Italy, there's no Switzerland, there's no Austria. None of those countries actually exist in 1519. There is a France, which you can see there on the left-hand side of the map, but France, the borders have changed, the government has changed, a tremendous number of things have actually changed when we look at Europe in 1519. There is one thing I want to point out to you, one institution or one entity that's going to be really important when we start talking about the Renaissance, the Reformation, sorry, and that is this section here in the middle that is outlined in red, which is called the Holy Roman Empire, which is neither Roman nor holy nor an empire, but it was called the Holy Roman Empire for a long period of time. The first emperor of the Holy Roman Empire was the Emperor Charlemagne, Charles the Great, from France, who became the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire in roughly 850 CE or so. It is inside the Holy Roman Empire that the Protestant Reformation will begin. And it's inside the Holy Roman Empire that the 30 Years' War will happen, and so on and so forth. An important entity in terms of the power of the Catholic Church and the influence of the Catholic Church and so on. Where we're going to look at today is this little part of Italy right here. So if we were to zoom in on Italy, which we can't do on this, but if we were to zoom in way up here in the northern part, here's Rome down here. So just up here in this blue part is where we have the cities of Genoa, the cities of Milan, the cities of Venice, Florence. They're all here, and this is where the Renaissance actually takes place. Okay, the Italian Renaissance takes place right there. But before we get into that, we need to look at why and how it is the Renaissance actually begins, and this ties us back into the point I was talking about earlier on about this group called the Humanists. And the Humanists are these individuals who are going around trying to find the information, trying to find the Greek and Roman documents. Plato and Ovid and Socrates and Sophocles and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, translating those works into modern languages and then disseminating the knowledge. The important thing about the humanists is that they believed that all people can be good if they are given an opportunity, if they are given the knowledge to understand right from wrong, if they are given the information that they can act upon, then human beings will do the good thing. The key point for them, and this is important, the key point for them was you had to increase the knowledge that people had. And if you think about this in a modern context, some of you, your families might donate money to charities, or you might give to, starving children in Africa, or you donate to hurricane relief here or there, or earthquake relief, or whatever it happens to be. If you didn't know that children are starving in Africa, then you are not in the wrong for not giving your money to those children, right? You don't know that there are people starving. You don't know that there are homes that have collapsed because of an earthquake. You don't know that there's a massive cholera outbreak in Haiti because of whatever. If you don't know what's happening, then you can't really act on that. So therefore, you are neither right nor wrong for not doing it. But if you know that people are starving and you have expendable income that you can help them with, then most people will give money to help. If you know that there was a massive earthquake in Haiti or a massive earthquake in Bhutan and people need help, well, what happens? Think about what's going on right now in India. Right? The hospital system is on the brink of collapse. It's buckling under the weight of another 400,000 people today infected with the COVID-19 vaccine. Infected with COVID-19. We know that they are suffering. And so what Canada is doing is sending over ventilators and remdesivir, the antiretroviral agent. The Americans are sending over all kinds of PPE, and they're sending over AstraZeneca vaccines and so on. We know that they are suffering. And that knowledge allows us, therefore, to do good. That's what the humanists are talking about. So ultimately, their main goal is to find as much knowledge as possible and to disseminate that knowledge out around the world to let people know right from wrong. That's who the humanists are. And really what they do is they translate all these Greco-Roman documents, which then set in motion the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment and the Renaissance. The opposite of a humanist is Niccolo Machiavelli. And some of you may or may not have heard of Machiavelli before. I like to mention Machiavelli because he is an individual who people are familiar with just by the name. Niccolo Machiavelli wrote a book in 1519 called The Prince. And The Prince, if anybody here goes on to study law or business or economics or marketing or advertising or international law, etc., you will most likely read The Prince, because The Prince is a book that is an anti-humanist tract. Niccolo Machiavelli was a courtier in Florence. Disagreed with the humanists' idea that all people are good, all people will do good if given the opportunity. What he believed instead was that people will give in to their baser instincts. People will give in to the idea that life is not, pardon me, life is not good, according to Niccolo Machiavelli. Life is not all sunshine and roses and dancing around rainbows and hugging bunny rabbits. Life is for the strong. The weak fall off and the strong survive. And what he argued was that being too nice is just as bad as being too good. Being too evil. We all know people, of course, that are really cruel and really malevolent, and they create enemies. But people that are really, really gentle and kind get run over by other people, right? You probably, everybody listening to this, you've got a friend or knew somebody who is just such a nice person that they're constantly taken advantage of by other people. Machiavelli said there is no right, there is no wrong, there is no up, there is no down. There is only results. Results are what matter. Good things are good to a certain extent, but they can be bad. Bad things are bad to an extent, but they can be good. And when someone refers to an individual or an idea or a corporation acting in a Machiavellian way, what they mean is what Niccolo Machiavelli wrote about in his text, The Prince. Sorry, I said 1519. It was 1515, not 1519. There are three key concepts in Niccolo Machiavelli's book. Number one, Human beings are more likely to respond to fear and power than they are to love and honesty and virtue. And this is why we say that he's an early cynic, right? Because that's a very cynical way of looking at people. We would like to think that love conquers all, and that love is the right thing, that people will do the right thing because they love their fellow man. And Niccolo Machiavelli said, no. People will follow the rules, and they will do what they are supposed to do because they are afraid, not because they think it is right. Think about this. The vast majority of you can drive or are taking your driver's ed lessons right now. The cars that you drive, all of the cars you drive are capable of doing 150 kilometers an hour. They are. Every single one of them probably have speedometers that go up over 200 kilometers an hour. But I would guarantee you that not a single one of you has gone 180 kilometers an hour down Rose Street. And now, you haven't. Nobody's done that. Nobody's done 180 kilometers down Rose Street. Now, why do you not speed at 180 kilometers an hour? You might not go that fast because, you love your fellow students and you don't want to run your fellow students down. Out of, because that's the right thing. Or because, your parents said don't speed, and so you said, okay, Mom, Dad, I will not speed. And like George Washington, you cannot tell a lie. Because you gave your word to someone, you're not going to speed. Is that the reason why you don't do 180 kilometers an hour down Rose Street? No! You don't do 180 kilometers an hour down Rose Street because if you get caught by the police doing 180 kilometers an hour down Rose Street, you're looking at a $10,000 fine. You're looking at a lifetime suspension of your license. You're possibly looking at jail time, not to mention the fact that they're going to impound your car and your parents will kill you for doing that. We don't speed that fast, not because we love our fellow students, but because we are afraid of the consequences of that. We obey the law not because we think the law is right. We obey the law because we are afraid of the consequences. This is what Machiavelli is saying. Fear is more powerful than love. And what he's talking about in this book, by the way, is he's talking to rulers. He's talking to people who want to be in charge. You want to maintain your control over a country or over a principality or a bishopric or whatever, make people fear you to a certain extent. Remember I said that virtue and vice they can both be good, they can both be bad. If people are too afraid of you, then they'll overthrow you. So you have to make them just afraid enough that they stay in line, but not so afraid that they overthrow you. So that's number one. That's the number one concept. The second concept is that there is no morality in power politics. There is no moral and immoral. Politics are amoral. The only good government or the only good corporation is the one that stays in power. So at the end of the day, if you're the king and you go to bed and you're still the king at the end of that day, whatever you did that day was good. So if you are still king because you built an orphanage for all kinds of starving children and that's why you're still in power, good for you. If you're still in power at the end of the day when you go to bed because you burned down an entire city and crucified 1,000 people, good for you. Doesn't matter. It's entirely irrelevant what you did so long as at the end of the day, you still remain in power. Politics are neither good nor bad. All that matters is the result. If you stay in power, you're a good government. And that leads us to Machiavelli's most famous phrase, which is the ends justify the means. And that's when people say that someone is acting Machiavellian, what they mean is it doesn't matter how you got to where you're going, you got to where you're going. So think about this. If you can get a scholarship, like one of the big, like the Loran scholarship at your university, if you can get one of those $60,000 scholarships because you studied hard and you worked really hard and you got really, really good grades and you're a really strong student, well then, yeah, hey, at the end of the day, you got the Loran scholarship, you got $60,000. Well, the ends justify the means, which is study, 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 study. If you were able to hack into the system and through the computer, you were able to drop in a virus and and all of a sudden you hack it and you get that thing illegally. According to Machiavelli, ends justify the means. You got the scholarship you wanted. It doesn't matter that you hacked it illegally to get there. It doesn't matter that you studied, so long as you got it at the end. If you didn't get the scholarship, well, then it doesn't matter what you did because you failed. And that brings us back to the second point, which is that you're no longer in power. You didn't achieve what you wanted. Therefore, you're a failure. Machiavelli's concepts, really ruthless concepts, but you can find those concepts in Walmart's business plan. You can find those concepts in Amazon's business plan. You can find those concepts in every policy that's passed by every government, right? Justin Trudeau or Doug Ford or Joe Biden, whatever policies they're passing, what are they trying to do? They're trying to achieve power. They're trying to maintain power, and they're trying to continue to exist the way that they're going in whatever way is possible. So if that was Donald Trump trying to foment a revolution on January the 6th, had he succeeded, Machiavelli would have said, bravo. But he didn't succeed. Therefore, Machiavelli would have said he was not a good government because he failed. Okay, it's an important concept because this idea of Machiavelli's is going to become the basis of modern governments. All modern governments go along this idea of Machiavelli. We talk to ourselves and say, well, no, we're passing social justice reform because it's for the good of all people. Maybe, but maybe it's because the government wants to stay in power. Well, we're passing tax reform because it helps out people. Maybe, but maybe it's what enables you to win the next election and stay in office. Every politician wants to stay in power. So you do, and you create policies that support that, okay? An important idea, we're going to get into the art right now, but I wanted to talk about Niccolo Machiavelli because this idea of being Machiavellian, there are a few times in history where one individual's concepts really resonate down all the way through the ages. I mean, you could say, well, what about Confucius and what about, you know, Shakespeare and so on? We don't even know that Shakespeare existed, right? We really don't. We're pretty sure Confucius never existed. Sun Tzu, who wrote The Art of War, didn't exist as an actual individual. We think that they existed. In our general concepts, we believe, well, you know, Confucius and Sun Tzu, they were real people. Most common modern historical evidence points to the fact that rather what that was it's a collection of writings from a collection of people that are put together. Same thing with Shakespeare. We're not quite sure Shakespeare even really existed. Niccolo Machiavelli existed. Niccolo Machiavelli wrote the book, The Prince, in 1515. So it's one of those times where you've got an individual who 500 years ago wrote a document that still resonates today in corporations, okay? I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying it's a positive concept to believe in, but it's a really, really important idea. All right. Okay, let's look at the Renaissance in art and architecture. And in order to do this, when the readings that you guys did earlier on today, looking at the world in the late 1500s, so in Mexico and in India and in China and so on, all those cultures have got their own art. All those cultures have got their own music. All those cultures have got their own cultural elements to them. However, what we want to dial right now into is what happens, this artistic revolution that happens in this small little part of Europe in the late 1400s, early 1500s. And it's an interesting thing. This happens every once in a while in history where you've got this odd confluence or unusual confluence when you've got individuals that are living at roughly the same time in roughly the same place in roughly the same part of the world that have a tremendous impact on world history. For example, we're going to talk about Raphael and Leonardo and Donatello and Michelangelo and all these great artists of the Renaissance who all lived within about a 50-year span and within about a hour and a half's drive today from each other. And they have had a tremendous influence on the way in which we look back at the world and the way in which we view art. You have the same thing happening in the late 1700s in Austria. So within 50 kilometers of one another, within 40 years of one another, you have Beethoven, Bach, and Mozart all creating music, all reshaping and revolutionizing the way in which music is created, all at the same time. And again, we talked about, I mentioned earlier on that, you know, in polls, Queen Elizabeth I ranks as the greatest queen in English history. Consistently, and this is over the last 200, 250 years, when people rank the greatest composers of all time, the top three, number three is always Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach, and number one and number two flip back and forth depending on the poll, but number one and number two are always Beethoven and Mozart, always in the poll. So these three incredible musicians all lived within 30, 40, 50 years of each other, all in the same sort of geographic area. Same thing happens in the Renaissance, which is what makes it such a remarkable moment in artistic history. Okay. There are a number of concepts in Renaissance art that make it unique as opposed to medieval art, which I'm going to show you an example of in a second. And again, for anybody who is an art scholar or really into art, this will all sort of ring true to you. But there are a number of key concepts that really make Renaissance art unique and remarkable when it comes out. First and foremost, you've got a lot of realism and you've got expressionism in the Renaissance art in the 1400s. For the very first time since the classical times, and by classical times I mean the Greco-Roman times, so 500 BCE to 250 CE, you have the first nude paintings, the first nude sculptures. The Catholic Church for a long period of time, for about 1,000 years, had banned nudity in art. It was considered inappropriate and improper and so on. However, why do we all of a sudden start seeing nudes in the Renaissance? Because the humanists are taking the ideas of the Greeks and the Romans and they are bringing them forward into the 1500s, into the 1400s. Well, the Greeks and the Romans did all kinds of nude statues and all kinds of nude paintings, and so Renaissance artists do the same thing. And when you look here, this is the expulsion of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. When you see Eve's face here, okay, again, incredible grief in her face that you can see. When we look at medieval art, so that's the art from like 1000 BC, 1000 CE to 1500 or so CE. There's really not a lot of realism. It looks a lot like, you know, grade 2, grade 3 kind of art. But the Renaissance art is much, much more realistic, much, much more expressionistic. That's one of the hallmarks of Renaissance art. Another hallmark is perspective. So when you have perspective, you all of a sudden have the vanishing point. So that means the things that are in the foreground are bigger, the things that are in the background are smaller, and so on. Perspective becomes a hallmark of Renaissance art. Well, why is it in the Renaissance that we have perspective and you don't have it prior to that? Because perspective is a geometric concept, right? You have to actually work out the mathematical angles in order to find that vanishing point that's there in the background. The geometry that is the underpinning of art was gone. It was lost to common knowledge until the humanists found and translated the Greek mathematical treatises. Number 3, classicism. So it's a re-emphasis back on the Greco-Roman ideas. So here we have a statue of the Venus from the 1st century. Well, you have the same thing happening in the Renaissance, where you have the Venus is redone. So the Venus de Milo, which is the exact same sculpture as this particular Venus, only she's missing the arms here on the Venus de Milo. You see this classical pose of the 1st century Venus in Botticelli's Venus Rising, which I'm going to show you in a minute. This classical way of painting, a classical way of sculpting the human body, even the way in which the face is set, very, very much built off of the Greco-Roman ideas. And another idea that's important when we look at classicism, the Greeks and the Romans, aside from the fact that they had all kinds of sculpture and all kinds of paintings of Zeus and Saturn and so on, their gods, they were very, very much influenced by and rooted their art in the human form, human aspects, things that are important to people. For a long period of time, because the Catholic Church controlled art, most art was non-secular. Most art was religious. So paintings of Mary and paintings of Jesus and paintings of the 12 disciples and paintings of God. But it wasn't about the human form, which is also why you don't have a lot of nudity. Nobody wants to see a picture of a nude Mary. That would be, considered, blasphemous. But the Greeks and the Romans were all about the human form, about the human body, about the things that are important to people. Okay, so individualism, that's what you see in Renaissance art. Speaking of individualism, what happens in the Renaissance is you start to see for the first time in about 1,000 years, paintings of non-religious, so not kings, not popes, not cardinals, but average, quote unquote, average. These are rich people. This is the Duke and Duchess of Urbino. By the way, this painting is in the American Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. So if anybody goes to D.C., you'll see this painting. A number of the paintings I'm going to show you here are actually in the Washington, D.C. collection rather than in the Louvre or somewhere else in Europe. They got a very good Renaissance gallery in Washington, D.C. This is the Duke and Duchess of Urbino. Most of you have probably never heard of the Duke and Duchess of Urbino. And there's a good reason for that, because they're not important people in history. But at the time, they were wealthy. At the time, they were able to commission a painting. And so there you have it. And by the way, these two paintings are separate paintings, and they were designed to go on either side of a fireplace. So these two people are looking at one another. Is it just me, folks? Or is this guy, if anybody here has ever seen the Johnny Depp, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, this guy looks like the Oompa Loompa. In that, next time you watch the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory with Johnny Depp, I'm pretty sure it's the Duke of Urbino. Anyway, geometry, like I said, important to have perspective. You have to have the math behind it. It's also important to understand that Leonardo da Vinci in particular used geometry all the time. And what we know now, because we've got X-rays and we've got infrared ways of looking through the layers of paint. Leonardo da Vinci, by the way, on many of his paintings put many layers of paint. The Mona Lisa, which is his most famous painting, has over 35 layers of paint, which means he went back over that again and again and again, microscopically fine layers of paint. We're able to look through all those layers of paint, and what we now know is that Leonardo da Vinci started not from the picture itself, not from the face, not from the body, not with the hands. He didn't start with any of that. What he started with was drawing out geometrical lines on the painting, which we can see underneath the layers of paint in order to make sure that the whole painting lines up. The reason why Leonardo da Vinci's paintings are so satisfying to the eye is because there is a logical geometric arrangement to them, which I'll point out to you later on. Last but not least, Renaissance art really gets into, and this goes with realism, it goes with individualism, but it also gets into some of the techniques that the Greeks and the Romans used as part of their paintings, which again become popular. Light and shadow and the softening of the edges. So sfumato is on the right-hand side there, and chiaroscuro is on the left. What you can see if you look at yourself in the mirror, if you were in the class right now, I'd have you look at each other in the room. When you look at me right now in the camera, what you see is, because there's light coming in from the window here, and there's light coming down on my head from above, this side of my face and this part of my face are brighter than this part of my face, because there's no real light shining on this part of my face. So this is a little bit darker than that side. Well, in Renaissance art, what they begin to do, though, is they begin then to brighten up. So there's a light source coming this way onto this woman's face. So this side of her face is brighter than that side of her face, and it darkens into the background as light fades away in the background. You also see sfumato, which is a softening of the edges here. So rather than having a harsh outline right here around her face, her jawbone's fairly harsh here. You'll see that this is not a Leonardo's Mona Lisa. There's no hard jawline here. It's a lot softer. But what you see here is the bushes here in the background, because they are in the background, here you have the foreground. You can see all the detail, but here the bushes in the background have faded. They've all blurred. Again, most of what we look at, this is one of these weird things when you think about this, but right now you're looking at a computer screen. The computer screen you're looking at is in focus. But if you, so continue to focus on the computer screen, but then just be aware of everything that's around the periphery of your vision. What you'll notice is everything that's around your periphery is blurry. So right now, when I'm looking at this computer screen, there's a coffee cup over here for me, and there's a piece of paper over here, and there's a remote over here and something else. All that is blurry because my eyes are focused right in on what I'm looking at. Well, that's how we view. We view in telescopic. It's binocular, but it's telescopic. Everything else that's not in our immediate focus is blurred. Well, if you want to make paintings realistic, this needs to be in focus because that's the focal point of what we're looking at. But everything in the background should be blurred because that's realism. That's the reality of it. So that's what sfumato is. Chiaroscuro is the darkening. So again, you start to see real elements in art that are incredible that are done all during this time period. All right. Before we go on, any questions on that? Just questions on what makes Renaissance art different? And again, if you have any questions, because I'm presenting this now so I can't see any of you, just put your mic on and just jump in at any point in time with a question or a comment or a query or any of that kind of stuff. Okay. We said the Renaissance starts in the middle of the 14th century, so 1350 or so. Giotto, who was an Italian painter, predates the Renaissance. So you'll notice there his life his birth and death years, 1266 to 1337. He was long dead by the time the Renaissance began, but he is viewed by a lot of art historians as the grandfather of the Renaissance. Some of his ideas, he begins to dabble with some of these ideas. He begins to dabble with some of the concepts that will become cemented in the Renaissance when we get to it. Most importantly, what he does is he uses light and dark to try and give his paintings depth. And on top of that, he tries to work out things like perspective, but he doesn't quite do a great job. I'm going to show you some paintings here in a second. One thing I want to note for you, a lot of Renaissance paintings, in order to see them, you have to go to Europe. And the reason why you have to go to Europe in order to see them is because the vast majority of Renaissance paintings are what are called frescoes. A fresco is a painting that is painted right onto the wall of a particular structure, a particular building. So when we look at Giotto's work here are in the, if you ever go to Assisi in Italy, where St. Francis of Assisi is from, you can see this particular fresco. The interior of the church, which has got flying buttresses on the outside and so on. This is the interior of the church right here. And Giotto did all kinds of paintings on the walls. You can see them here. All kinds of paintings on the walls in frescoes. So we have pictures of his paintings that are in art books and so on, but you can't go to Washington, D.C. or go to the Louvre or go to to MoMA and see Renaissance art by Giotto, because you have to go to Italy, which is where it is. Same thing, the Last Supper painting by Leonardo da Vinci is not painted on a piece of wood. It's painted on a wall in a monastery. So you have to go to Italy. If you want to see the original Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci, you have to go to Italy in order to see it. All right, so here we have some pictures by Giotto. And again, when you look at them, what you see is there is definitely, if we look down here in this particular painting, there is definitely the idea of light in the foreground. Right, this hill is brighter than the background here. So what Giotto's trying to do is draw the eye forward to the individuals in the front. Same thing here when you look at St. Paul, who's working his way, this is after the conversion of Damascus. St. Paul is brighter in the front. All these colors in the front are brighter, and he's darkened the background to try and get people's vision to come forward. Same thing down here. The angels and all the other people in the background are darker than God and the cloud and the priest here in the front. Okay, this is all about St. Francis. This is not Renaissance art because, again, what you can see is there's no real sense of perspective. St. Francis here, who's praying, is bigger than the trees that are in the background on the mountains, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, the guy's a friggin' giant here. Same thing, you try and make the focal point, and this is what the medieval artists would do. They would make the focal point of art the biggest thing in the art. Well, he looks like he's about 4 times bigger than all these other people here, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So there's no real perspective, there's no vanishing point, but there is some elements of brighter colors, there is some element of trying to get a sense of realism and dynamism and sfumato and chiaroscuro and so on in there, which is why, even though it's not Renaissance art, a lot of art historians say that Giotto was onto something that gets picked up on 100 years later by the real Renaissance artists. I want to really quickly show you the greatest example of Renaissance art, sorry, not Renaissance art, medieval art, is the Bayeux Tapestry. And the Bayeux Tapestry is in France, in Bayeux, in Normandy. And if you go and see the Bayeux Tapestry, which I highly recommend that you do, what you'll notice is that the art that's on the Bayeux Tapestry is not great art. Oh, fine, I agree. So here, let me see if I can make this bigger for you. Right. Come on. Oh, goodness. No. Okay. Come on. Stupid art.
If you
There we go.
right click on it, you might be able to open the image in a new tab.
Let's try that. Ah! You're so smart. Your brain a kiss. Well done. Okay, so here we have, thank you very much. So here we have the Bayeux Tapestry, created in, after the Battle of Hastings in 1066. The Bayeux Tapestry is a extraordinary piece of medieval art, and it was woven by the wife of William the Conqueror, and all the wives of all of his nobles that he brought with him on his invasion of England in 1066. By the way, quick little side note, in 2066, we'll all be well vaccinated by that point in time, make plans to go to England in 2066, because there will be a hell of a party celebrating the 1000th anniversary of the Battle of Hastings in 2066. I'm not sure I'll be around at that point in time. I'll be in my mid-90s by then, but all of you will still be up and about. The 1000th anniversary of anything is probably a pretty cool thing to go and celebrate. So this Bayeux Tapestry, you can see by looking at it, it looks like, this is what I mean by it looks like grade 2 or grade 3 art. If any of the people here ever drew, images of, battle scenes or planes or whatever when you were a little kid, there's no real sense of perspective. Everyone is flat. It looks all kind of weird, right? I mean, you don't even know who's important and who's not important and so on. But this is an extraordinary piece of art that was done. This is what a lot of medieval art looks like. And when I show you Raphael's art, when I flip over back to the presentation, you'll see the difference between this, which is, again, arguably the greatest medieval piece of art, compared to the Renaissance art. This looks like a grade 3 did it, as opposed to a tremendous artist. As we go through this course, one side little thing I'm going to say is, and you can jot these down if you want, Mr. Elmsley's travel tips for going to Europe, because at some point in time you will go to Europe. Whether you do that as, a post-university, use up the rest of your OSAP before you become a real person and start your job, or, go on your honeymoon or go with your friends or whatever, you will go to Europe at some point. So as we work our way through the course, I'll give you all kinds of good little travel tips and things that you should do and things that you shouldn't do in order to save money, and things that are worth going to see and do. The Bayeux Tapestry is worth going to see, and when you go there in Normandy, if you're going to go visit the D-Day beaches and so on, go to the Bayeux Tapestry. When you go in there, you have the option to spend an extra €4 in order to get the little voice thing that you can put your around your head and explains the Bayeux Tapestry. It's worth doing. It's worth spending the €4 to get the explanation of the Bayeux Tapestry. The Bayeux Tapestry is nearly 100 feet long, and it's in this enclosed glass case. So what you do is you start at one corner and you work your way along the Bayeux Tapestry, and as you go along, it tells the story of the Battle of Hastings and so on. Extraordinary, but you really don't know what you're looking at. Like, if you're looking at this, what am I looking at, and who are these people, and what's going on? You don't know unless you're actually listening to the explanation. So it's worth the money for that. A lot of other places it's not worth. Don't get it at the Louvre, and don't get it in a lot of other places, but do get it here at the Bayeux Tapestry. One other funny little side note, I want to talk about the Bayeux Tapestry. I just mentioned this because it's just a funny little story. At the very top of the border, at the very top of this, what you'll see is, you notice here that there's 2 horses that look alike, and then there's these 2, what are they, something that look alike, and then there's 2 birds that look alike, and so on. The Bayeux Tapestry was woven, as I said, by William the Conqueror's wife and the wives of all the nobles he took over with them. Well, in order to demarcate the part of their tapestry that was done by them, they wove at the top symbols of what was most important, or why their husband was so significant. What was important about their husband for the reign of William the Conqueror. So all on the top, all on the border at the top, you'll see that the things change. If we go back here, is there another image of the Bayeux Tapestry? Let's go back here and see there's another image. There's one of sheaves of wheat and so on. Anyway, here you can see the Bayeux Tapestry right there. So it's this amazing gallery where you just walk along it as you go. It is worth going to see. It's extraordinary. Anyway, one thing, I'm not going to tell you what you're going to see because it's kind of fun. But when you go there, about a third of the way along, you'll see an extraordinary image in the Bayeux Tapestry, which essentially is pornography, right in the Bayeux Tapestry, that was woven in there by one of William the Conqueror's nobles' wives. It's extraordinary. I was there with a group of teachers in 2004. We saw the Bayeux Tapestry. As we're walking along, one of the guys goes, "Hey, Helmsley." I said, "What?" He goes, "Come here." I said, "What?" He goes, "What the hell is that?" And when you look at it, you go, "That can't be what I'm looking at." I don't think I'd. Wow, that is what we're looking at. Anyway, it's fun when you go there. You'll enjoy it. Anyway, this medieval art, okay, one of the greatest examples of medieval art, the Bayeux Tapestry, but really kind of terrible by artistic standards. Let's go back to the Renaissance here, okay, and when we get to Botticelli in 1444, much more realistic than the Bayeux Tapestry. 400 years later, what you see is you can actually see curves, you can see realism, you can see the human form as opposed to two-dimensional. It's definitely three-dimensional. You can see around the birth of Venus, you can see the two-dimensionality, you can see that the cloth draping in the breeze behind the woman on the right. This painting was done for the city of Venice in the 1400s. And the reason why this was painted, and by the way, you'll note the date, 1485, the vast majority of the really famous artworks are all done in the late 1480s through 1515. So in about a 30-year period, they perfect Renaissance art. This painting was done for the city of Venice to exemplify the two things that Venice was most well known for. One, you see the sea in the background, the water in the background. Venice was then and now an extraordinarily important port in the southern part of Europe. So seafaring and trade and so on was very important. The other thing that the birth of Venus indicates is the second most important industry in Venice, which was prostitution. So Venice in 1500 had 100,000 people. Fully 10%, 10,000 of them were prostitutes, servicing all of the sailors that came in and out of the port every single day. So this is what this painting really sort of symbolizes. By the way, a Simpsons reference. If anybody has ever watched early Simpsons episodes, there is a Simpsons episode where Homer starts to fear that he is falling in love with his co-worker named Mandy. And if you just Google Homer and Mandy, the episode, it'll come up. And there's a scene in an elevator where Homer gets on the elevator and Mandy's there, and he's like, oh, because this is not good, because now he's going to be one-on-one with this girl who he's kind of fantasizing about, who really very much likes him. And so what he does is, in his head, and you can hear him talking, he says, think unsexy thoughts, think unsexy thoughts, think unsexy thoughts, to avoid thinking about Mandy, who he's attracted to. And so he imagines Barney, the town drunk, in a bikini, which is horrible. And then Barney belches, though, and Barney morphs into Mandy in a bikini, and then Mandy morphs into Botticelli's Venus. And in the background, the two angels that are blowing on the Angel of Venus are Larry and Carl. And Carl looks over at Homer and goes, Homer, this ain't good. Anyway, The Simpsons does all kinds of really cool shout outs to art and to literature and politics and so on. If you ever watched that episode, Botticelli's Venus is in that one. Okay, an incredible piece of art. The Venus here, by the way, is Simonetta Vespucci, who was one of the most famous courtesans in all of Venice at that point in time. She had slept with the Pope. She had slept with the Doge of Italy, the guy who ruled Italy. She had slept with several cardinals. She'd given birth to two children, both of whom their father was a cardinal in the Catholic Church. So an incredibly important courtesan for all the rich, wealthy men. That's who was the model for Botticelli's Venus. Question? No? All right. Moving ahead then, Raphael. Raphael is kind of the Mozart of the Renaissance, in that if you look at his life expectancy there, he only lived to be 37 years of age. So much like Mozart, who died at 35, 36, Raphael, his career was cut quite short. So it's extraordinary. Who knows what Raphael would have been able to do? He may have been eventually even more famous than Michelangelo or Leonardo. We don't know because he died so very, very young. But he certainly was a contemporary of Michelangelo, certainly a contemporary of Leonardo. And in this particular painting called The School of Athens, we see all those things I talked about earlier on in terms of Renaissance art, those 6 things. So you see sfumato, you see chiaroscuro, you see individualism, you see secularism, you see perspective, you see the colors, and all those sorts of things are all there in this particular painting. The subject matter is the School of Athens. So all these people here that you see in this painting are all people that are famous philosophers. So Plato and Socrates and Aristotle and Sophocles and so on, they're all represented here in this particular painting. Now, what's interesting about this is that the colors, when you look at here, the Birth of Venus, okay, there's certainly a lot more earth tone colors there in Botticelli's The Birth of Venus, and there's way more earth tones in Giotto's paintings. The reason for that is because artists made their own paint, and artists made their own brushes. So they had to use natural colors and natural sources. So for the red, you'd use ochre. For the black, you'd use ash. For the green, you'd use chlorophyll, and so on. But every artist created their own palette, which is why every artist's paintings look so different from one another. It's also one of the things, by the way, that when art forgers try and create a new Raphael, or they try and create a new Leonardo and say, oh, look, we found this painting that nobody knew was done by Leonardo, or they try and copy a Leonardo and sell it as a real thing. What a lot of art historians can do is they can take a small flake of the paint off, and if there's anything remotely chemical in there that is not natural in origin, then it's not a Raphael, because there wasn't a DuPont chemical factory in 1485 in northern Italy. On top of that, because Raphael made his own brushes, as did Leonardo, as did Michelangelo, the brushes that they use and the way in which those brushes move the paint are unique. They're like fingerprints or eye scans. Nobody made brushes the same way that Leonardo made brushes. And the hair that Leonardo used was a certain kind of hair from a certain kind of animal that he put together in a certain kind of way that was dried a certain kind of certain length of time. And that makes his paintings, the actual microscopic brushstrokes, unique. All of Leonardo's paintings look exactly the same on a microscopic level. A forger can't copy that, which is just kind of interesting. So when we see the colors here in Raphael's painting, Raphael has done something unique, something different with the colors. It's almost pastel-like. When you look at the colors that are here, right, the light blues that you see, you don't see that in Botticelli. Much more earth tones, but here you see a lot of bright colors, a lot of lightness, a lot of real ambient colors. That was really a hallmark of Raphael's paintings. One other thing I want to point out here, Raphael was trying to create a vanishing point. You can see, working your way down the middle here, right, you've got a big arch, and then a smaller arch, and then a smaller arch, and they're all kind of fading to a center point down here, right? That would be your vanishing point for this particular picture. But it still didn't look quite right. Raphael wasn't quite happy with it when he was finished. So again, and we can do this now by looking back at the paintings under electron microscopes and so on. What we know that Raphael did now is what Raphael did was, once the painting was finished, in order to give it the image that what's going on in here is actually happening inside of a building rather than outside of a building, and to give it a sense of depth, Raphael, this arch that's here, Raphael painted this arch on after the painting was complete. So he painted the whole painting and then painted this on top of the painting in the foreground, which then, as you can see over here, cuts people off, right? So people are kind of going in and out of frame. Like if I'm walking in or out of the frame of the camera, it gives it a sense that there's something happening in front. So it brings the whole front of the picture forward and gives a real sense of depth to the background. It's not perfect, but it's so much better than what Giotto was able to do, and even what Botticelli was able to do. Leonardo is the king of this, but Raphael did a very, very good job on it. All right. And what's interesting about this is when we look at this, there are all kinds of details here for, in the painting you can look at. And again, if you go to the art galleries, this one, by the way, the School of Athens, is in the Louvre in France. If you go and you listen to it, it explains all the different elements of it. Here are all the people that are important, you know, the Pythagorean theorem, and there's Zoroaster, and there's Ptolemy, and so on. One thing I want to point out, so let's go back. So this picture, these two guys are right here, dead center in the painting. Okay, you see them here? And what's important is that Raphael painted a self-portrait in here. And here we get, what I love about art is that nothing in paintings is accidental. A photograph, you folks take tons of photographs with your cameras and selfies and so on and so forth. A picture camera just takes a picture of whatever it sees, right? It doesn't distinguish between. There's a lot of accidental stuff that's in pictures that you take. There's nothing accidental about a painting. Raphael puts things in there on purpose. Raphael painted in here a self-portrait. The individual on the right is Raphael. That's his face. That's what Raphael looked like. Who's this guy? Does anybody recognize that guy?
Is that Plato?
It's supposed to be Plato that's who he represents, right? But has anybody ever seen a Renaissance artist who looks like that?
Is that Da Vinci's face that he used?
Yeah, that's Leonardo da Vinci. So Raphael put himself and Leonardo da Vinci at the dead center of the School of Athens, representing the two greatest minds in Greco-Roman history, Plato and Aristotle. How egotistical is that, right? Like Raphael's not hedging any bets there. There's no gray area. He's saying, Leo and me, we are kings in the Renaissance. We're the best. We're the top. We're the most important. So he stuck himself and Leonardo da Vinci for all time in the dead center of this painting, indicating that they are the best of all time. Incredibly egotistical. Of course, they're very, very good artists, but incredibly egotistical work that's there. Okay. What's really important, though, is that you see Michelangelo. Michelangelo Buonarroti is his last name. Again, some of these guys, they go by their first name or they go by their last name. Michelangelo is his first name. Leonardo is the first name. Raphael is the first name. Botticelli was the last name of an artist. So it goes back and forth. Giotto is the last name. Michelangelo Buonarroti, who, in my opinion, is probably the most important artist of the Renaissance. Some people would put Leonardo above him. I would put Michelangelo above Leonardo for different reasons. What's important to note is, let me go back here to this painting. In the School of Athens, you've got Leonardo and Raphael here, dead center, chumming it up, right? BFFs forever, smiling at one another. Again, when you look at the picture, they're looking at each other. Hey, here we are. And you'll notice in Raphael's hand, Raphael right here, as he's pointing down with his hand, he's pointing over. Who he's pointing at is Michelangelo Buonarroti, sitting here in his painting, sulking on a block of marble. Leonardo and Raphael were best friends who hated Michelangelo, and Michelangelo, for his part, hated the two of them. So in an incredible burn for all time, Raphael painted Michelangelo sulking in this painting, and the two of them in the background sort of mocking him. Again, it's one of these, we forget sometimes that these people that existed were real people, in the sense that they loved and they hated, and they had ideas and concepts and sense of humors. They were exactly like us. Raphael thought Michelangelo's going to hate this, and he did it on purpose to burn Michelangelo in this painting. Now it's going to come back and burn Raphael later on, and I'll tell you about that in a second. But just like when we get to classical music later on, and we don't have to go into tremendous depth on this, but what's important about all these artists is that each artist had a particular thing that they were good at or really, really exceptional at. They dabbled in other things, but what really made them special was a particular style of art or a particular type of drawing. Much like when we look at, I told you about Beethoven, Bach, and Mozart. Bach is most renowned for his organ pieces because he was the Kapellmeister of the church in Vienna. So for the royal family, the Habsburg family, he was the Kapellmeister. So every week he would write a new piece of organ music for the organ mass. So sheep may safely graze and so on. All the organ music that you are familiar with by Bach, that's what he's most well known for. Also, if anybody here is a musician doing their grade 6, grade 7, grade 8, grade 9 piano, Bach also did a lot of really technical pieces. Which you'll have to study when you're doing all of your technical music for piano or for organ. But he's best known for that. Mozart is best well known for his operas. So The Magic Flute or Don Giovanni, Marriage of Figaro. Mozart was extraordinarily good at writing that kind of music, as well as writing quartet pieces of music and so on. That was his big thing. Now, of course, he did all kinds of other things, but what he's best known for today are his operas that he wrote. Beethoven is best known for piano music because he was really the one that made the piano the instrument of the day. Mozart and Bach would have preferred to play an organ or a harpsichord. Beethoven makes the piano popular. That's for Elise and so on are written for piano. Makes them popular. And of course, Beethoven's big claim to fame is symphonies. So Beethoven wrote an opera. It's not great. Mozart wrote a symphony. It's not great. I mean, and again, this is from a guy who can't even play chopsticks on the piano. But what I'm saying is that what makes Mozart good is different than what makes Beethoven good or extraordinary. Michelangelo was not a great painter. Michelangelo was a sculptor. Michelangelo was born to a family of stonecutters. He was raised by a family of stonecutters where he learned how to sculpt marble and sculpt stone and so on. And when in 1501, he created what is arguably the greatest sculpture ever created, which is the statue of David, which is in the city of Florence today. That is definitely worth going to see. Travel tip number 2, go and see the statue of David. I've seen it with 2 different school groups from Preston High School, and on my own, I've seen it twice. And whether you like art or you don't like art, there is just something absolutely extraordinary about being in the same room as the statue of David. And I'll show you pictures of it, and you've seen pictures of it before, but there is nothing like being in the room with that statue. There is honestly something magical about the statue. It's an incredible piece of art that, just like hearing Beethoven's Ninth Symphony performed by a full orchestra. If you've never heard that before, you're all familiar with Beethoven's, Ode to Joy. If you ever have an opportunity that a symphony is putting on the Ode to Joy, the Ninth Symphony, go and watch it, because hearing it on a stereo is nothing like being in a room and being surrounded by the orchestra and hearing all the sound coming out and the full choir of 75 people just crescendoing up into the Ode to Joy. It literally will raise the hair on the back of your neck. That's what makes it so powerful. Being in the room with the statue of David is just, it gives you chills. Anyway, Michelangelo was not a painter so much as he was a sculptor. That's where he put most of his effort in. His first real sculpture was this, called the Battle of the Centaurs, which he made as a bas relief at 16. Bas reliefs means what you do is you take a piece of stone and you carve in reverse whatever it is you want to depict, and then you pour molten bronze into it, and then once it cools, and you break the block, and you've got this. So this is what Michelangelo created when he was 16 years of age. This is in downtown Florence at the Il Duomo. It's inside. If you walk into Il Duomo, which is the big church, the big weird-looking church in the center of Florence, walk into Il Duomo and go to your right, and it's in the second gallery on the right-hand side is where this Battle of the Centaurs is. But what really put Michelangelo on the map was in 1499. So again, let's look back at his birth and death dates. 1479, when he's 24 years of age. 24 years of age. There was an opportunity for him. There was an open competition for a sculpture to be created for the new St. Peter's Basilica. So St. Peter's Basilica, which is in Rome, which you're familiar with, where the Pope lives, was rebuilt in the Renaissance time period. Rome had been left to sort of languish and go into squalor for the better part of a couple hundred years because the papacy had actually left Rome and moved to Avignon in the south of France. So After the 100 Years' War is over and so on, the papacy comes back to Rome, finds a city that is in ruins and so on, and so the church then uses its money to begin to rebuild the city and rebuild St. Peter's Basilica. So the big dome at St. Peter's Basilica was designed by Michelangelo. The altar that's in St. Peter's Basilica that the Pope gives Mass at was designed by Michelangelo. So all of that is recreated, and all the art is all Renaissance art in the Vatican, in St. Peter's Basilica. There was a competition out in late 1490s, open competition for anybody who would create a statue that could go inside St. Peter's Basilica. So it had to be a religious subject. So even though the Renaissance is secular and humanistic as opposed to religious, this is a religious commission. So Michelangelo created this statue called the Pieta of the Virgin Mary, who is right here. And this is, if anybody is Catholic and done the Stations of the Cross, after Jesus is taken down, after he is dead, often the last cross in the Stations of the Cross, second last cross, shows Mary, Jesus's body coming down off the cross. This is what you see is the now dead Jesus being held by his mother in this pose. And when you look at the close-up details of Mary, like keep in mind, this is made out of a piece of stone, out of marble. Michelangelo was absolutely extraordinary at being able to create movement and folds and softness. The cloth that she's wearing, the hijab that she's wearing, and the softness of her robe, you can just see the flowing ripples and details in this. By the way, this is still in St. Peter's Basilica. If you go to St. Peter's, there are 3 doors in St. Peter's Basilica at the front. The right-hand one is a doomsday door. The one in the middle is one that's always open for guests to come in, and guests always go out the left-hand door. The doomsday doors are always shut. They're only open on certain occasions by the church. But when you walk in the main door, right in front of you, you'll see the altar, and the big cupola at the top is right in front of you. But to your right, you'll see Michelangelo's Pieta, which is there. And when you look at this, the extraordinary detail on Jesus's face, and even like all the individual hairs are all carved in. Jesus's, and I couldn't get a good enough close-up of this, but his eyebrows are sculpted in, and so on and so forth. Incredible detail in the Pieta. A couple of things about this. You'll note that this toenail of Jesus's and this foot of Jesus's is more detailed than this one. That has to do with the fact that over the last 400 years, all kinds of people that have gone to the Vatican, they would pray in front of the statue, and then they would kiss their hand and they would touch the stone. So what you see is the foot of Jesus is being worn off over hundreds of years and thousands of people going and praying in front of the statue. Now, a couple of things about Michelangelo, which makes him so extraordinary. We talked about perspective, all right? There is also, and for anybody who's an artist who's listening to this, you'll know this, there's also times where you have to distort perception, or you have to distort proportion in order to make something look correct. If any of you are ever going to hang up a shelf in your university apartment when you go, and you get a level, and you put that shelf up. Sometimes you'll put a shelf up and the level says, that's exactly level, perfect. But then when you look at the shelf doesn't look level because nothing else in the room is level. So it's sometimes better to make the shelf not level, so it actually looks better as opposed to a level shelf. It doesn't really fit with our mind. Logically, you want the shelf to be level, but you want it to look right more than anything else. Michelangelo had a real problem when he was sculpting this, because every time he tried to sculpt, and he did all kinds of smaller models before he did this full one. This full one, by the way, is about 12 feet high. Okay, so from the bottom, the base here to the top is about 12 feet, and it's about 9 feet across. It's a massive statue, massive. The problem is that you've got this full-grown man laying across Mary's lap, and it always looked like Mary was about to drop Jesus. It didn't look comfortable. She wanted, what Michelangelo wanted, and when you see this painting, when you look at it, what you see is Jesus is being held by his mother in much the same way as you were all held when you were younger by a parent figure, right? But as a full-grown adult, if the guys on the chat here, generally speaking, are bigger than the girls that are on the chat here. I mean, if you were to go home right now and lay across your mom's lap, it's going to look awkward, right? Because probably a lot of the guys in the chat now are bigger than your mother. It's just, it's kind of a weird thing. What Michelangelo did then, and once I point this out to you, then you'll see it. But until I point it out, you don't notice it. He made Mary's bottom half 3 times bigger than her top half. So when you actually look at the proportions of Mary's shoulders and her head, now look, here's Mary's knee and Mary's other knee, and her knee goes from here all the way down to the bottom. So this is if Mary were to stand up, Mary would be massive. This would be like 3/4 of her body would be her lower legs and so on. But Michelangelo hides all that between all the folds of all of her dress and so on, so you don't even notice the fact that her lower part is big because he's hidden it behind the folds. But the deliberate distortion of the perspective or proportions, 3 times bigger base to the top that's there, from a distance, when you look at that, actually looks perfectly in proportion, which is an extraordinary thing for Michelangelo to have figured out. And as I said to you before, it's extraordinary when you look at this. There's not a single chisel mark on this painting, on this sculpture anywhere except right here. And if you look at this sash, right, you can see that there's letters that are right there. There's a V and there's an S. Okay. If I go back, that sash is right here on Mary. When Michelangelo, who was 23, put this statue in for consideration, the Pope loved it, as has millions of people since. Pope loved it and said, who made this? And a different artist, can you imagine what would have happened? Imagine you put 3 years of work into something. A different artist said, that's mine, I did it. And the Pope's like, well done to you, sir. Fantastic. Great sculpture. And Michelangelo, who's a nobody, he's a 23-year-old schlub at the back of the room, is like, what the hell? That's mine. I did that. So that night, after the statue had been put into place in the Vatican, Michelangelo broke into the Vatican with a hammer and a chisel, and he walked up and he carved right along this sash right here. Michelangelo Buonarroti of Florence made this. So everybody from this point forward can see Michelangelo Buonarroti written right across Mary's sash. Michelangelo lived long enough. He was nearly 80 by the time he died. Michelangelo lived long enough to write an autobiography. So we know what he was thinking. We know what he went through. We know what his thought process was. Unlike a lot of other artists that we have to try and sort of imagine what they were thinking, we know what Michelangelo was thinking because he wrote a book about it. He wrote his autobiography. And he says in his autobiography, when you read this, when he talks about it, he said after he carved his name into that sash, he stepped back, looked at the sculpture, and he said, the hammer and the chisel dropped from my nerveless fingers, and I dropped to my knees, and I wept bitterly. Because what he had done in his arrogance and his ego is he had made imperfect what had been perfect. By carving his name across the sash, he had ruined the statue. He had ruined the beauty, the symmetry of the statue in his arrogance. And he never signed a thing again after that. Even stuff that he painted, he never signed. He just let it stand on its own for the way that it was. So there's that. Oh, quick little other side note. I said that there's no chisel marks except for the name here. That's not exactly true. There's also a chisel mark here across Mary's face, the bridge of her nose. And you can see it, like the shadow there, you can see it a bit better than you can here. The reason for this is, and it was in the late 1970s, I believe, St. Peter's Basilica is open to anybody. There's no charge to go into the church, and you can walk in like any church here in Cambridge. You can walk into a church; it's free. You can walk into St. Peter's for free. If you want to do a tour, it costs you money, but you can walk in for free. Late 70s, I believe, a guy walked into St. Peter's and walked up to the statue of Mary. And when nobody was looking, he jumped up onto the statue, onto the base that's right here, and pulled a hammer and chisel out of his jacket and immediately began to hack away at the face of the Virgin Mary. And by the time, the crowd screamed and the guards came and so on, he had absolutely destroyed the face of the Virgin Mary. So her nose was broken off and flakes and chips had gone everywhere. So they hauled the guy down and they arrested him for defacing the statue and so on. And the Vatican immediately called in all the world's best art restorers to try and fix this great piece of art that had now been destroyed by this guy. And the art restorer said, well, we can fix it. It's not a problem. We can fix it. But the problem is marble, as you folks know, is a naturally occurring substance, which means every piece of marble is unique, right? So what they said was, we can't just take another piece of marble and stick it on there. It won't be the same. We need the original marble back that Michelangelo used 500 years ago when he made this, 400 years ago when he did this. The problem is that people that were there that watched this guy hack away at the statue picked up pieces of the Pieta and took it away with them, because, you know, it's like, wow, I was there. Look, here's part of the Pieta. And so it was scattered to the world, because, I mean, again, on any given day, you got people from all corners of the world that are in the Vatican that then travel back. So the Vatican took out full-page ads in newspapers on every continent, with the exception of Antarctica, on every continent saying, please, if you were at the Vatican when this happened and you have a piece of the statue, please send it back. The remarkable thing is every piece was sent back. So they were able then to take the statue, rebuild the statue, almost exactly the way Michelangelo had it. The only thing they couldn't do was get rid of that crack in her nose that was there. They just couldn't smooth that out. So it's there. And now, unfortunately, if you go to see the Pieta, it's behind 3 inches of bulletproof glass. So you can't actually touch the statue anymore. You can see the statue, you can walk around the statue, but you can't touch the statue because of that guy in the 1970s. Anyway, extraordinary, extraordinary, extraordinary. But this is not the greatest sculpture of all time, despite the fact it is extraordinary. The greatest sculpture, there goes Michelangelo Buonarroti of Florence. The greatest statue of all time ever created. And this is not me, this is art historian saying this, the statue of David, 1504, which is in Florence. The statue of David, again, look at the hand of the statue. Look at all the veins that are carved in there into the statue. The face of David is designed to show resolute determination, and yet also a little bit of fear that's there. Florence was not a powerful city. Florence was not a strong city at this point in time. It was surrounded by more powerful cities, Milan, Genoa, Rome, etc., Venice. So Michelangelo created the statue of David for the city of Florence as a symbol of the city. You know, and again, if you know the story of David, the Philistine army was rampaging across the Middle East at that point in time, and the city that they came to, the giant Goliath challenged someone from the city to come out and battle him, and the only person that would go out was David, who was a young shepherd with a sling, and he went out and he killed the giant. He killed Goliath, and then he became the king of the city, and so on. So it was a great symbol for this small city surrounded by powerful cities that want to destroy it. And again, incredible. When you look at it, you can't quite see it here, but all the veins are all carved into it, all the tendons. Look at your own hand and look at the tendons and the veins and so on. It's incredibly well done, fingernails and so on, but he even carved in all the hairs on the arm of the statue of David. And when you're there, when you're looking at it, you can see in extraordinary detail what's there. A couple of things make this statue really, really remarkable. One is that the statue is 18 feet high, and it's standing on a 5-foot high plinth. So when you're standing there looking up at it, the statue is 20 feet up in the air. The top of David's head is 20 feet up, 2 stories up in the sky. Again, what Michelangelo knew was that when people are down on the ground looking up at the statue, they won't be able to see the detail the way that it should, because his head will get smaller the further away it goes. So what does he do? He messes with proportion. David's head and his hand are 3 times too big for the body. This hand is quite large and the head is quite large. When you look at it straight on, it's too big. But when you're standing down at the base of the statue looking up at the statue, because it's in the distance, David's head shrinks to the proper proportions and it looks perfect from the ground up, which is just an incredible thing. The other thing about this statue that made it remarkable is that the block that he carved the statue of David out of had a huge crack going through it. And the stone cutter who cut the block of marble out was offering Michelangelo all kinds of blocks for his next one. After the Pieta, everybody wanted to give their marble to Michelangelo. And Michelangelo was looking at blocks and going, no, not that one, no, not that one. He said, well, what about that one that's over there, this big, huge 20-foot block? And the stonecutter said, well, you can't have that one. It's got a crack in it. There's no way, because when you hammer against it, the reverberations will break. It'll break open. And Michelangelo said, no, I can do it. I'll do it. I'll take that one. The guy said, you won't be able to do it. He goes, I'll take that one. The crack in the block of marble goes down the sash on the back of David's back, which is why the sash follows an odd line. That's where the crack was in the actual original piece of marble. The statue is incredible to look at, incredibly detailed. If you want to see the statue of David, you can pay, and I do recommend paying the 12 euros to get in there and see it, because to see that statue is extraordinary. However, if you want to save yourself some money, here's travel tip number 3. If you want to save yourself some money, Michelangelo, like I said to you before, Michelangelo worked his way up. So he would start with small models, and he would work up, and he would work up, and he would work up, and he would make scale models. So, you know, a 2/3 size model of whatever he was doing. Because this particular block had the big crack in it, he made a 9/10 scale version of the statue of David before he made this actual final version of the statue of David, because he wanted to make sure he got it right. If you are in downtown Florence, Florence looks like a spoke, like a wheel. So there's the Il Duomo is in the middle of Florence, and all the streets radiate out from Il Duomo. So you're looking at the main doors of Il Duomo, and if you turn around, there's a road that leads away from Il Duomo. Follow that road away from the center of town. And on your left-hand side, about half a kilometer down, you'll see a building called the Palazzo Pitti, the Pitti Palace, named after the family Pitti that owned it. Go through the palace, because it's free, it's open to the public. Walk through the palace, and into the background, you have the Giardino di Boboli, the Boboli Gardens that are there, which is where a lot of the Florentines go to have picnics, or they just go to read a book in a big park. It's a park maintained by the city. So go away from Il Duomo, in through the Palazzo di Pitti, into the Boboli Gardens, and go all the way to the back of the gardens. The gardens are huge. The gardens slope up, and at the very top back of the gardens, there is a big area where it's got all gravel around it and 4 benches that nobody ever goes to, because people don't walk all the way to the back of the Boboli Gardens. And there, in the Giardino di Boboli, on top of this hill, is the 9/10 version of the statue of David carved by Michelangelo before he carved the actual statue of David. And there's no crowds, there's nobody around. You can have all the time you want to sit there and stare at the statue of David for free. So if you're short on money and you can't afford to go into the museum that the statue of David's in, just go to the Giardino di Boboli, and you can see the statue of David there, because it's the same one, just a little bit smaller. Okay. Again, little Simpsons reference. There's a Simpsons episode where the statue of David comes to Springfield, and you see Homer and Marge walking through the Springfield Museum at the end of the episode, and they're walking down a long hall, which has got paintings all the way down the side, into a large rotunda, and in the middle of this rotunda is the statue of David. The animators based the Springfield Museum on the actual museum where the statue of David is. So the rotunda in the Springfield Museum is the exact rotunda that the statue of David's actually in Florence. It's never gone on tour. They don't send the statue of David on tour. It doesn't go anywhere. All right. But anyway, extraordinary, extraordinary, extraordinary. The only painting ever done by Michelangelo, the only real painting, was the Sistine Chapel. Also worth going to see. Also worth going to buy get the little ear thing for. Incredibly important. The Sistine Chapel was painted by Michelangelo in 1508 to 1512. And so keep in mind, 1499 Pieta, 1504 Statue of David, 1508 to 1512 the Sistine Chapel. Now Michelangelo was not a painter, he was a sculptor, but the Pope really wanted him to create the Sistine Chapel for him. And when he got the commission in 1508, he hired all kinds of other artists to help him with the painting. When you go into the Sistine Chapel, which you have to pay money to go into, it's free to go into St. Peter's, but the Sistine Chapel, which is attached to St. Peter's, costs money to go into. It is worth €7 to go in there. And what's amazing is you'll walk into this room, and you'll be in a room filled with 1,000 other people, and all 1,000 of those people are doing this. Just staring at the ceiling, because you're looking up, and from end to end and down the back wall of the Sistine Chapel, what you see is the story of the Bible all told out. From the creation of the heavens in Genesis, the creation of man, which is right here, which you've all seen. By the way, to give you a sense of size, okay, because I told you that the statue of David's 20 feet tall. How big are these paintings? The actual gap between Adam's finger and God's finger, if you go up to the top of the Sistine Chapel and you were to measure it, it's a 1 foot gap between Adam's finger and God's finger. A foot, this much. So it's this is an extraordinarily big painting, the entire Sistine Chapel. It's bigger than the roof of our gym, to give you a sense. Okay, a massive, massive painting. Adam and Eve getting expelled from the Garden of Eden, so on and so forth. And you can see this all the way along. Here you've got God and Adam, right? The touch of life. Here you've got the expulsion from the Garden of Eden. So the middle section talks about that, and then all around the outside are various other stories. And all along the back wall of the Sistine Chapel, right here. So this is the ceiling. There you can see the expulsion from the Garden of Eden, right? There's the snake around the tree and Adam and Eve being kicked out. But along the back wall, which is the altar, this is the altar where the Pope would stand. Okay, all on the back wall is the Book of Revelations, the Last Judgment. And here you see the people being dragged down into hell over here, and all the people that are good being brought up to heaven. In this Last Judgment painting, here's Jesus in the middle. In the Last Judgment painting, Michelangelo painted the only self-portrait. Michelangelo was a troubled kind of guy. In this self-portrait, all of Jesus's saints are all there, and every single one of Jesus's disciples, I should say, suffered terrible deaths. So they were boiled alive, or they were crucified, or they were crucified upside down, or they were, shot to death with dozens of arrows. One of them, Saint Bartholomew, was skinned alive by the Roman Empire. And here we have Saint Bartholomew holding his skin, and this is Michelangelo Buonarroti's self-portrait. That's what Michelangelo viewed himself as, which again, a psychologist would have a field day with that. Like, tell me about your father. Like, what's going on with you? I don't understand. Troubled guy. By the way, on a side note, down here, all the people that are being dragged into hell, Raphael is dragged into hell down here, and Leonardo is right down here with a devil jamming a pitchfork right up his butt. So again, as much as Raphael made fun of Michelangelo, Michelangelo's like, yeah, well, we'll see you in hell, and painted his enemies into his paintings as well. Raphael, by the way, begged and begged and begged and begged Michelangelo for the commission to help work on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. And Michelangelo said, well, show me what you got. And he had him paint one section, and then he fired Raphael and whitewashed over the painting, saying, nope, that's crap. I'm going to do what I want rather than what you want. So anyway, lots of stuff going on between those guys. Michelangelo, absolutely important in terms of the sculptures. I want to zip through, being conscious of the time and the fact we've been on here for an hour and a half, so I apologize. But I want to just quickly zip through a couple of things from Leonardo da Vinci, and then I will leave you with something to think about on your own. Leonardo da Vinci, here's a self-portrait of Leonardo. When people talk about a Renaissance man, what they mean is someone like Leonardo da Vinci. He was a painter, a sculptor, a scientist, an architect, a botanist. He was a poet. He did everything. And when we say a Renaissance individual today, what we mean is someone who's well-rounded, that has lots of different things that they do. And Leonardo, I'll post this for you so you can look back at this in more detail later on if you want. He did some sculpting. He did all kinds of science. You can see here, this is his Vitruvian Man working on the proportions of the human body. You've probably seen that. If we ever get back into my class, there's a picture of the Vitruvian Man, a poster up there. He did all kinds of biology because he dissected human bodies to look at how muscles worked and how the skeletal system worked and how the intestinal system worked and so on, in order to make his paintings much more realistic. He invented all kinds of things: a machine gun, a tank, a helicopter, a plane, a parachute, a tremendous number of things that wouldn't exist for hundreds of years. This is his tank right up here. Here's his machine gun. Here's his helicopter design. He engineered all kinds of things, staircases and siege defenses. But really what he's most famous for, like I said, is his paintings. So Michelangelo, sculpture. Leonardo, paintings. That's what he's best known for. And there are two paintings that he is really, really, really well known for. The Last Supper and, of course, the Mona Lisa. The Last Supper here, you have a perfect example of the geometry in the Last Supper. Like I said before, Leonardo started with geometric shapes and then filled them in afterwards. So here you have Jesus and all of his disciples. You also, in the Last Supper, have a perfect example of perspective. So what Raphael was trying to do, Leonardo perfected with his art, because he was at heart a scientist, a mathematician, more so than he was a painter. There is some controversy over this painting, The Last Supper, of course, if anybody's ever read the Da Vinci Code, which is the question of whether or not this individual right here is St. John, or according to the Da Vinci Code, spoiler alert, it's not St. John. In fact, it's Mary Magdalene. And that's why when you look at the picture, Jesus and Mary are opposites of one another. So the color scheme is slightly opposite. Their heads are opposite to one another. Their hands are nearly touching here. Peter has got his hand. What looks like his hand is on John's shoulder, but if that's Mary Magdalene, the hand is actually cutting across Mary's throat as a threat to Mary. There's no historical evidence, by the way, no historical basis for the Da Vinci Code, but it is an entertaining book to read as you go through it. Again, when you look at a lot of his paintings, geometry is everywhere. It all starts with the geometry. But the most famous painting that Leonardo ever created, and probably the most famous and most expensive painting in the world, the most valuable painting of all time. If the statue of David is the best statue, this is the best Renaissance painting, the Mona Lisa, done from 1503 to 1506. Its proper Italian name is La Gioconda, not the Mona Lisa. The Mona Lisa is a French name that was applied to it when it was taken to France. It actually was in Italy until Henri IV of Navarre took it on one of his trips into the Vatican. He bought it off of somebody, the Pope or somebody, and took it back to France with him, where it hung in his bathroom for quite a while. And then it was taken with him to his palace at the Louvre, which is where it stayed ever since, in the Louvre. Because the Louvre was originally the palace of the French royal family, and only later was it turned into an art gallery. It is the most famous painting of all time, most likely because it is the most often stolen painting of all time. It's been stolen at least 7 times. The last time was in 1912 when it was stolen, and it was lost for 7 years, from 1912 to 1919, where an Italian guy went in and literally just took it off the wall and walked out of the Louvre with it. It wasn't attached to the wall at that point. There was no security really in the Louvre in 1912, and he just took it off the wall and stuck it in a false bottom in a suitcase and put it in his lodging house in downtown Paris, where it stayed for the next 7 years. Anyways, eventually given back. It's now at the Louvre. You can go there and see it. The amazing thing about the Mona Lisa is that it's only about this big. It's about the size of a piece of foolscap. It's quite small, really. Every painting, every poster you've seen of the Mona Lisa is 3 times as large as the actual Mona Lisa. But it's a neat painting to go and see in reality, because, again, you get a lot of the details that are there. The Mona Lisa is also one of the most often imitated paintings of all time. There was a macaroni Mona Lisa there. Picasso did his version of a Mona Lisa. Andy Warhol did a version of the Mona Lisa. The New Yorker magazine did a Monica Lewinsky version of the Mona Lisa. One of the more interesting things about the Mona Lisa, though, is the idea that perhaps the Mona Lisa is actually a self-portrait of Leonardo da Vinci, because her eye sockets, her jaw, her nose line, everything else all line up exactly with Leonardo da Vinci's self-portrait, which is an interesting little theory. We know who it was based on. We know who it was painted for, and we know why Leonardo da Vinci actually was commissioned to paint the painting, but he never actually gave it over. He worked on this painting for 4 years, and when he died, it was still in his possession. He had never given it to the person it had been commissioned for. And I think because for Leonardo, Although he wrote all kinds of stuff in his notebooks, he never actually wrote down his own thoughts on things. He wrote down his observations, but not his thoughts. For some reason, he just couldn't part with the Mona Lisa. It was something he was never quite finished with. He was always tinkering with it. And again, it's one of those remarkable things about the Mona Lisa. As one of the most perfect paintings in the history of art, he was still never quite satisfied with it. He was always tinkering with it, even until the moment that he died. So you can imagine how much more extraordinary it would be had he lived another 5 years or another 10 years. It's kind of like Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, which is, again, one of the greatest pieces of piano music ever written, the Moonlight Sonata. Beethoven had to sell that at one point when he was low on funds, and he had only rewritten it 10 times at that point, and he wasn't quite finished with it when he had to sell it. And for the rest of his life, after he sold it, he never played it, and he never wanted to hear it, because it always reminded him of the fact that it wasn't finished. It wasn't quite right, which again makes you wonder, it's the best piece of piano music ever written. How much better could it be? But same thing with the Mona Lisa. Who knows? An extraordinary moment in artistic history. Hey, by the way, last thing I'm going to say, in this course, the vast majority of voices you're going to hear, aside from mine, the vast majority of voices you're going to hear are the voices of men, because men are the ones that are in charge. Men are the ones that are the rulers of the church. They are the ones that are the scholars. They're the ones that got to study. It's not that there weren't women around. Of course, there was half the population then were female. They were very, very important women. But the vast majority of the voices we're going to hear in this course are those of white men, because those were the voices that were writing the history. So here's my pledge to you, that any point in time when there is a female voice that we can focus in on, or a person of color that we can focus in on, we will do so, because they are few and far between in this particular point in European history. So to that note, there was a female Renaissance artist, the first female artist in the West to create a worldwide, or a famous reputation, was a woman named Angisola. Again, that was her first name. You'll note that she lived just after Raphael and just after Michelangelo and Leonardo. So she's at the very tail end of the Renaissance. But on the left-hand side there, you see a self-portrait. On the right-hand side, you see a portrait of Minerva, the goddess of wisdom. So and again, what's extraordinary about this self-portrait is you see her holding a book, right? At a time when women weren't well educated, and it was considered unseemly for a woman to be educated. She was flaunting the fact, she was proud, bragging about the fact that I can read, I'm a scholar, I'm important. So an important female voice to a certain extent for the Renaissance right there. Okay? Questions on the Renaissance?